5. Gemini. The five of us crept into a tunnel filled with stale scents of packed earth. The walls closed in on either side, so we strode single file. Pebbles dribbled down from impressions left in the mud bricks, like our footfalls threatened to bring the corridor down on us at any moment. Tsumi leaned close from behind.
Well, this isn't spooky or anything.
I chuckled, welcoming her distraction from my recent revelations that my life since I'd entered Enora was a giant lie. Ever run an instance before?
Hmm.
The sound came like an abbreviated laugh and echoed in the tight space.
Why would I enter a prison for demons and the like?
If that's what you believe they are. She scurried closer, as evidenced by the way she bumped my shoulder.
Say more. You know something the rest of us don't?
How did one go about explaining instances where the lone pieces of a massive video game world that didn't evolve naturally and were instead designed to help players rank up? Maybe someday I would get into it, but it didn't seem like the time or place to fuck around and divide my attention. Even less Sumi's and the rest of my groups. Sumi awaited my answer. Let's just say we all have subjects we could explain given time, but a lack of context can be a barrier to true understanding. I'm not implying you're clueless, just that there are whole worlds out there, and this might not be the best place to explain.
Much better.
Sumi slid up beside me despite the narrow hallway.
If I tried to explain how scales on my instrument worked, you'd probably be equally as lost until I gave you context.
I chuckled. I'm a self-taught guitarist who could never read a note. You have no idea how right you are. Machini turned a corner in front of our procession, then stopped suddenly. Roshan bumped into her and uttered something indecipherable. I threw an arm out in front of Sumi like I was slamming on the brakes and didn't want her going through the windshield. I called ahead. What is it? Machini's purr was almost too low to hear when she responded.
A portal.
What? I rounded the corner. What do you mean, poor? I braked hard. The corridor merged into a wide, round room with a circular groove cut into the floor. Above it glowed a shimmering teleportation oval. The party gathered round to peer through at a dark, starry night with little traces of horizontal white caps in the distance. It was too dim for my eyes to do the job alone, but I knew breaking waves when I saw them. After all, I'd lived minutes from a beach most of my life.
You are being offered a quest. Explore the granite coast. See what you might discover and solve a puzzle in the outdoor instance. Rewards: 27,368 XP.
Initial wonderment about whether the quest had been offered by the old artificial intelligence or the new passed as quickly as it had come. If I couldn't chat with people outside the instance, and I'd been cast there to stop my meddling in Lucera's business, Enora version 1.0 had also isolated me from the game's new AI. After all, the moments she'd had me relive at my foundation an hour before were her final ones as the supreme goddess inside the simulation. The final seconds of her existence before Infinity Designs froze the world and cast her out. She'd seen it coming too late, but not so late she couldn't activate whatever contingencies surrounding me she'd put into place. All that considered, the portal had been placed here in case we somehow made it past her skeletal guardians. Always a step ahead and always prepared. Sometimes I wondered if Enora hadn't decided to sacrifice her existence in the interest of this grand plan of hers, because she suspected Nokuro might otherwise pull the plug. After scanning the quest text a second time, I grumbled to my team. What do you think?
That you see trouble at every turn.
Roshan thrust her finger toward the scene.
Waves break beneath a cloudy night. How bad could it be?
It'll suck.
Based on what?
One side of my mouth ticked into a subtle arc. Experience? When I didn't say more, she clutched her hips, then turned to face me.
You can do better. Share your thoughts with me, old friend.
Sorry. My experience tells me that the path of least resistance is almost never the shortest way to the exit. Is that clear enough? To my surprise, she grinned.
The goddess would have us work for our rewards. Of this, I am certain.
She dropped one hand, swiveled just enough to comfortably view each portal, then her head twitched to one side.
But Jara's intent was to trap us back there in the stony building, yes?
I nodded. But I wouldn't try to explain how the former AI might have presented the portals as a contingency plan. The gods knew she'd accounted for almost everything else. Roshan waved a hand toward the portal.
A cloudy sky is still a sky. I spy distant waves. Open fields lend us the ability to see threats coming from every direction.
Then she swept her arm to indicate the tunnel leading into the open, stony, cold place where we stood.
Seems better than here.
She leaned close, then hooked her arm inside my elbow.
Solara also requires our patience at times, yes? Maybe that's why she would present this option.
Given her perspective, I couldn't argue with her logic. Solara had nothing to do with it, but good luck with that explanation. Although I'd have as soon slit some throats to work off some steam after the revelations of Jara's treachery, it would serve me to fight off single-minded tendencies. Even if the quest was just a delaying tactic put in place by the treacherous former AI, it was XP, and we had nothing better to do. Amelia disagreed.
You all might be inclined to choose what seems the easier path, but if we've learned anything since we've met, it's that no path is easy with the mythic.
I was about to agree when she pointed the index and middle fingers of one hand at her eyes.
Open areas just mean ranged attacks can drive us in any direction, and I'm assuming that portal isn't taking us outside the instance.
Sumi said nothing, but threw the elven woman a twisted-up expression like she was confused. My mind drudged up an image of rickety cabins on either side of a wide path in a foggy area where pickaxes swung by soulless beings clanked and echoed to us. The massive outdoor introduction to Kaim's domain had turned out to be only an illusion forced onto my mind in hopes I would read the Tome of Destruction, and I didn't recall any other outdoor, instanced spaces. Then, realization dawned, and I could have palmed my forehead. My foundation, now a town known as Skyville, was such an outdoor area. With each upgrade, hamlet, borough, then town, the borders had expanded, so the invisible barriers on all sides moved with them. When I peered through the portal one last time, I wondered where the borders of the coastline might await us. How much room would we have to move? But a final sweep of the dead end we'd wandered into decided me. There was no point standing around waiting for our destinies to greet us. Besides, XP was XP. Let's just keep our eyes on the horizons. A wave of nostalgia slammed into my brain with the introduction of humid, salty air streaming up both nostrils.
You have discovered the Granite Coast. This coastline boasts huge rock formations forming natural, flat-topped towers, plus 430 XP.
What would have been the sounds of waist-high stalks of dry beach grass rustling around our legs was muted by the crashing waves. The cloud cover was dense, and the ambient light on which my seeing spell relied was also muted, so the resulting view was cast in a light fog. Then a new message popped up.
Welcome to Purgatory, Gemini Fowler. If you're seeing this message, you have somehow evaded my trap. Due to your persistent nature and tendency to meddle where you don't belong, you have been transported to a special realm where time does not exist, so events can unfold without your interference.
Would I ever see the end of the AI, bitches? She knew she'd frustrate you, I thought. She read your thoughts, studied your gameplay. If you want to win the day, it's time to grow up. Be less predictable. My party waited patiently while I scanned our surroundings, but after a long moment, Roshan spoke just loud enough for her voice to carry over the waves.
My father once took my sister and me to a shore like this in the sunny months. I recall how soundly I slept despite the loud waves.
I nodded. I lived so close to the beach in New Hanover that my skin often carried a sheen I blamed on the salty air, whether that made sense or not.
My map isn't working.
Sumi reported. Because we're still inside the instance. You haven't discovered the territory. Her head whipped around.
Still inside an instance?
Her head lolled back and she scanned the cloudy sky.
But how is that possible?
She pointed overhead for emphasis.
We're outside.
I nodded. Never heard of outdoor instances?
Never imagined such a thing. The places are ethereal prisons for creatures of the darkness, right?
That's the rumor I've heard, but nothing is as simple as it seems. Trust me, we're still in an instance.
But there's an ocean beyond this bay. How could it be contained?
Her words trailed off as confusion won the day. If you were to swim out beyond those rocks on either side, you'd probably run into an invisible barrier. Before she could flood me with more questions, I hurried my words. You were a member of a priesthood at one point, and surely you learned that not all things can be explained. Roshan interjected.
The goddess will make apparent that which we need to know.
That was bullshit, but I'd let it go if it got things moving. A little reverence never killed anyone, no matter how misguided. Reverence has killed millions, dimwit, my own inner critic protested. I let that one go, too. Tsumi's stretched features revealed her pure awe. It reminded me of how I'd felt when I'd first entered the dark wood. Maybe that was what was missing. Had my frustration tamped down that sensation of exhilaration I'd experienced so many times in my early Enoran days? Of course it had. And the irony was, if the AI had learned so much about me in the early days, then seen how I'd evolved to become what I was in the present, it was time for a rewind. Time to rekindle that love for my new world that always helped me push through the challenges. Whether distant barriers waited to block our paths, I couldn't know. The flatland revealed little of interest except for the beach, but after a minute pushing through the wheat-like stalks, a distant conical structure reaching skyward bloomed into view, a solid shadow against the backdrop of purplish clouds. There was a first for everything. I raised my chin in that direction. Is that a lighthouse? Twisted trees stretched across the flat grassy tapestry, blocking most of the horizon to the left of the structure. But to their right, something gave off a dim glow, a strange discoloration pulsing left to right with the breeze. The hell is that? Somehow Roshan heard my mumbles despite the waves and the crosswind blowing her hair all around. She tilted her head to one side, just a tick in that way she did when focused on her HUD.
My map's botany overlay is showing plants in that area.
Awesome. What rank did you need to unlock that?
I don't recall. Maybe 25.
The unmistakable crescendo of a guitar chord brought my head around. Tsumi's long legs paced in clipped strides in the rear of our small procession. She clutched the neck of an acoustic instrument similar to one she'd played in a Brucerian inn the day we met. Transparent bubbles surrounded the party members, then faded.
Sumi plays hasty melody.
Thanks. She nodded. Giles, or the Azure Blur, as I like to think of him because of his ghostly stealth form, had taught Roshan that healers should walk in the middle or rear of a party to ensure their protection. As if his lesson had landed on deaf ears, she pranced forth, like a child who was happy to be liberated from a classroom and into a breezy day. Another example I could learn from her. Nothing got her down. After the narrow confines of the instant's corridors, who could blame her celebrating a freedom of space and movement? Since my seeing spell returned muted results, I disabled it. The swaying plants glowed more prominently against the backdrop of the cloudy night. Although I was stoked at the possibility of some botany points, the walk toward them got my thoughts straying to the strange, armored Terran who'd sprung us from the trap inside the mausoleum. How he'd violated the mechanics governing instances so lackadaisically. Weird shit. The masking of his stats. His strange nameplate leaving me to wonder whether he was a player or NPC. His strange nameplate leaving me to wonder whether he was a player or NPC. He has to be a developer. Or maybe he's another guardian like Jara. Then I stopped in the high grass while my party forged ahead. That's exactly the kind of thing she'd do. Send in a strange construct. Someone with masked attributes to throw us into confusion. Pretend to be an ally while sending us down a predetermined path. After all, if Enora 1.0 had wanted us to sit in that mausoleum under the guard of a bunch of level 50 elite undead, why would there have been a portal leading to the Granite Coast at all? Throw in a quest, the potential for XP, and our limited choices would drive us forward, distract us while Lucira did her fucking work. But what if it was a coder? Someone from Infinity Designs? I shook that one off. It didn't make sense. If Infinity Designs knew I was there, the construct would have announced his intent. Plus, he'd said he needed to get out before they saw him. So, who did he reference? Might Nokuro have sent down orders to leave me where I was for some unknown reason? Had one of his people violated that mandate and not wanted to be caught in the act? Whoever he was, he couldn't get us out of the instance, and that had taken him by surprise. My thoughts returned to Jara, Priya's mother and betrayer. I still struggled with her claim that an Enora without magic would be too much like Earth, that this was the AI's primary reason for dethroning the king, to interfere in contradiction to her coded primary directive. Maybe Priya was gone, lost to me. The AI and her bitch matron guardian didn't emote. They possessed no simulated hormones or chemicals to grant them empathy. When it came to my feelings, they couldn't give less of a shit unless they served their purposes. My thoughts were cut short when we arrived, and I knelt beside Roshan. She turned one hand over, slipped a stalk between her first and second fingers, then plucked.
Simmer bloom.
She remained in her crouch when she passed it to me.
Here. Should be low enough for you to analyze.
It was hard to believe our last lesson had only been 2 nights previous, when the picking of some bristleweed rose me to rank 11 and made me an apprentice in the discipline. I took the plant, then focused on its orange flower to find little red streaks shooting across its velvety petals.
You have discovered Simmerbloom. Although your skills are high enough to learn the identity of this plant, your botany skill must reach level 20 to understand its properties. Alternatively, a botanist of higher rank can teach you about a plant's uses and possibly increase your skill level. +1 botany. Your botany skill has reached rank 13.
What's it used for? Tsumi and Mashini strolled further to the north, apparently uninterested in the topic. Fine with me. Let the ranged attackers scout. Best to be alert, especially when it was so easy to forget we were still inside an instance. Amelia's answer came over my left shoulder.
Chemical firebombs.
In a former life, the sudden eruption of words so close to my ear might have caused me to jerk, but I'd grown accustomed to her stealthy ways. That sounds useful. Roshan nodded.
If your intent is to burn things violently and for a long time, it would be. But I don't hold interest in such endeavors.
Of course you don't. I reached down. Should I just pick them like you did? I slipped a stem between 2 fingers. Like this? She nodded.
The power is in the stem, not the roots of this one. So, you can just snap them off near the ground, and they will sprout new stalks. But you will also want to see these.
She duck-walked to her right and brushed some grass to the side. Earthbound rocks I hadn't noticed before curved along the ground to raise the elevation by as much as 6 inches in spots. Sprouting from the soil between the grooves of 2 long stones were clustered mushrooms, putting off the glow we'd seen at a distance. Ooh, I love fungus. Are those edible?
If you want to die a slow and painful death, sure.
Amelia slapped my shoulder, then stepped around us to peer down.
If you cook them long enough, you can mitigate the poison, but they'll be crusty and disgusting by that point. Some varieties cause hallucinations.
Enora had shrooms. No cow patties required. Now I'd seen it all. Roshan's head swiveled in slow turns.
You can boil them. The heat destroys the poison. They're rendered safe from undesired effects. And they're left with a meatier texture.
Considering my circumstances of late, I wasn't convinced narcotic effects would be undesirable, but I let it go. Then, I rewound the conversation. One of my eyebrows shot up, and I cast my gaze at my bodyguard. Amelia was the least egocentric being I'd met in Enora. She had nothing to prove to anyone, so it was unusual for her to volunteer information unless she was certain, and to say something inaccurate went against her vibe. She pressed 2 fingers to my shoulder and gave it a little shove.
Don't act so surprised. Do I look like a botanist to you?
She reached down to her belt, thumped her one-handed crossbow, tapped her longbow over one shoulder, then strolled toward the pair, who'd continued toward the distant structure. Okay, so maybe she was a little egocentric. Roshan and I dug up a few caps, then divided them among our inventories for future exploitation.
You have discovered glow shrooms. These mushrooms maintain their illuminating properties for up to 1 hour after they're picked, +1 botany. Your botany skill has reached rank 14.
Maybe I'd raise my cooking or alchemy skills, but if history was any indicator, my plans would change, and it was more likely I'd take them to Tryllip's apprentices at my Foundation's Alchemist's Lab to rank up instead. No biggie. It wasn't like I aged, nor was Enora going anywhere. The rolling rumble of the waves climbed to a cacophony that rendered speech pointless by the time we reached the high structure. I'd once visited the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in North Carolina. It rose over 200 feet to protect ships from a coast so treacherous it was called the Graveyard of the Atlantic. After that, I wasn't particularly impressed with this one. Rust scraped my hands when I grasped the door lever.
The Harare Lighthouse. Named for Winstein Harare, a famed adventurer and the discoverer of Rubal, this lighthouse stands 157 feet tall.
But why would a lighthouse inside an instance be named for anyone? I shook off the thought. Although I couldn't speak for the vast world I hadn't explored as a whole, it wasn't like normality ruled the day anywhere in Rubal. Besides, players liked lore, history. When I thought about it, it was kind of a nice touch. But it also left me wondering why the AI would go to the trouble if the coastline was part of a trap intended solely for me. I'd never understand the bitch. Rusty hinges creaked their dismay. I had to lower one shoulder and throw my weight behind the effort to push my way inside. The dim interior reminded me to recast inner illumination as my boots scratched on sand granules underfoot. We crowded inside the closed space, then stared up through the pipe toward the top. A tight spiral staircase twisted down to the lobby on one side. I gripped its rails, then shook furiously to ensure the whole thing wouldn't come crashing down. Not that my strength was enough to test for our combined weight. When I turned back to eye my team, Tsumi was grinning. She turned over one hand.
Feel free to lead, Shenhua.
I smirked, then mounted the first stair. Fine. While the door lever had been rusty and the hinges hard enough they might have snapped if we tested our luck, the stairs proved stable. All 5 of us climbed uneventfully. A single window looking out onto the coastline below presented quite the view about halfway up our ascent, but we pushed on to the top without stopping to admire the dark scenery. There we discovered a high structure with panes of glass on 3 sides. The system called it a lantern room. Closer inspection revealed plates of various thickness, stacked together and overlapping to form a curved yet jagged surface. The central piece was the tallest and widest, and I wondered if the design was intended to create narrow beams the lighthouse keeper could direct. A metal bar with a black handle jutted from beneath its disc-like base. A mirror attached to the backside, leaving about a quarter of the contraption open. When I gripped the rod, the handle was smooth and soft like rubber. Although I wondered what it was made of, we had bigger fish. The dish inside was empty and shined to a brassy sheen. I eyed a rod protruding from beneath the contraption. Turn the handle. Shine a light to the sea to warn off ships. Nothing complicated. Did the lighthouse serve a purpose for us? Very likely. Why stick it there if we weren't going to use it? But when I looked out the huge window toward the coast, there were no signs of ships, which made sense if the unseen barrier I suspected waited offshore. However, nestled in the middle of the bay was a lump my seeing spell couldn't reach. Maybe I was imagining it. I squeezed between Sumi and Machini, they were becoming quite the pair, to gaze out the window as if a couple steps would bring clarity to the scene. To my surprise, it did. I spied a long rowboat rising and falling in the shadows of a long structure reaching out over the sea. I tapped the glass to indicate that direction. Must be chained to the pier. Tsumi squinted up the beach.
Good eyes, Gemini. How'd you see that?
I shrugged. Amelia sidled up beside me and pointed at the lump in the middle of the bay.
Think we're supposed to go to the island?
Maybe. But I doubt we're supposed to leave the lighthouse without finding a way to use it.
You are being offered a quest, shedding some light. Figure out how to illuminate the Fresnel lens and cast light into the harbor. Reward, 22,000 XP.
Your logic is sound,
Roshan agreed.
but how do we fuel the light?
Amelia shook her head in derision. I squinted my disapproval. What? She patted my bag.
The mushrooms.
I loved how quick the elf was to the draw. Focusing on my inventory, I brought out the shrooms, then reached into a gap beneath the platform and dumped them into the disc. At first, I didn't believe there was enough glow to produce the needed light, but they bloomed brighter against the mirror and back. Soon, a narrow beam shot through the front of the lantern room. Without being asked, Machini snatched the handle. When the platform didn't turn, we all knelt to search for a solution. Amelia found a latch. After she flicked it, the disc broke free with a clank. The light reflected off the rickety pier and illuminated the boat, but it was too distant to gauge its condition. I had little doubt it would carry 5, but for all I knew, it was full of holes. I pointed toward the center of the harbor. Machini directed the light. When the beam reached the middle of the island, its path crossed with a tall, wide stone we hadn't seen against the black backdrop and overcast sky. The monolith pulsed, but nothing else happened. Well, if all we see is a boat and an island, maybe we should use one to reach the other.
You have completed a quest, shedding some light. Amelia figured out how to illuminate the Fresnel lens and cast light into the harbor. Reward, 22,000 XP.
That was easy.
Roshan chuckled.
Nice, for a change.
Her face lit up at first, then the corners of her mouth turned down. What? I asked. She shook her head, then gave a low, subtle wave with one hand.
Private chat. Roshan.
Priya, Jara's betrayal. It's all very confusing to me that the goddess wouldn't know. Does Jara serve Hokram? Wouldn't I have sensed this? Too many questions, not enough answers.
I couldn't rightly tell her that the new goddess who'd taken over for the former AI, or actually was still that AI, but sans sentience, had nothing to do with the grand plan to fuck us over and that she could relax, so I just clasped one of her hands, then squeezed. She returned the grasp. We still had each other. I took no small amount of solace in that.
To the boat, then?
Machini inquired. I shrugged with both shoulders so all could see. I guess. A set of stony stairs cut into the rocks leading down to the beach, took a hard right about 30 feet down, then another left to reach the shore. A sharp wind brought up the waves as we descended, and we had to slow our roll, lest we tumble to our deaths. When we finally reached the bottom, Tsumi plopped down on the last stair, then fumbled with the laces on her high boots. I meandered close to yell over the noise. What are you doing?
As infrequently as I experience the beach, I will have sand between my toes.
A history of having sand magically appear in my car's floorboard, regardless of my efforts to rinse it off at the beach. Showers left me imagining the discomfort the bard would suffer when it ended up in her boots. To each her own. But Priya's face sneaked into my mind again when I turned to watch the high waves. What seemed only a few seconds later, Roshan waved a hand before my face.
Gemini?
Tsumi's boots hung over one shoulder and she tapped them for effect. A glance down revealed 10 happy toes wriggling in the sand. My oldest friend in Enora wrapped an arm around my waist in an unusual display of affection, and her hair swept across my face. She pulled it away, then started twisting it in a knot. To anyone else, it would have appeared like she was just tying up her hair. But my interface popped open and she continued our conversation on the down low.
Private chat. Roshan.
I see it in your eyes. I am here if you want to talk about her.
It was like we were sharing an emotional bond, like the one that had linked me to Priya, the one the AI created to further our attachment. It lent new perspective about my recent past. Revelations abounded, and the more deceptions I uncovered, the more pissed off I became. I nodded to let Roshan know I'd received her message, but I had nothing more to say on the topic. We reached the pier, then tugged at a long, thick rope anchoring the boat to a massive pylon. Once we'd dragged it further up the shore, Roshan tossed her staff inside, apparently having moved on from our chat. The pier's giant supports kept most of the swells at bay, literally. But I wonder how we'd cut into the waves without getting flipped.
Gemini!
Amelia shouted just loud enough to hear over the watery ruckus. I whipped my head around. A massive, hunching figure emerged from the waves, then stomped toward us. It clutched a trident, taller than its hulking form, across its body. Fins rose on its back, but it was too dark for me to see its facial features. Red tendrils swirled around the trident's shaft until they converged at the top. When the beast raised the weapon, a casting bar filled above its head. A wave of energy slammed into Machini's chest, lifting her from the ground before throwing her like a sack of laundry. Amelia's crossbow was leveled a second later. Roshan yanked her staff from the boat, then offered her free hand to the mishone rising from the sand. Tsumi raised a flute. Drawing a single katana because I couldn't dual wield, I charged.